we get this huge industrial boom from the development of fertilizers and the ability to grow massive amounts of foods that enabled us to mobilize for war. And so now we've got all this corn, we've got all this soy, and we're being told that saturated fat's bad for you. So here we've got this source of polyunsaturated fats that's coming out of seeds that's never been in our bodies really before. And we're being told that if you eat saturated fat, it's bad for you.
What if the oils in your pantry, like canola, soybean, or sunflower, collectively known as seed oils, are silently fueling inflammation and heart issues, while the fats we've been told to fear could be the key to thriving? Today, I'm joined by Dr. Ravi Kumar, a board-certified neurosurgeon, University of North Carolina assistant professor, and host of the Dr. Kumar Discovery podcast, where he questions medical dogma with a scalpel-sharp focus on evidence. We'll dive into the seed oil controversy, why these so-called healthy fats might be derailing your health goals, how they became dietary staples despite their risks, and why stable fats like butter could be your secret weapon. Get ready for practical insights to optimize your well-being straight from the cutting edge. Hey, good afternoon, Dr. Kumar. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Joe. I'm really excited to be here.
Obviously, people are hearing a lot about this topic now, probably due to whatever's going on in the federal government, more so. Not to get into any politics or whatever, but seed oils have become, for better or worse, a hot topic right now. I like your sort of question everything motto, rethinking dietary fats. Was there a time that you may have started to suspect the seed oils, canola, soybean, whatever it might be, were more villain than hero? Because we're being told, I think, from both sides. One side's telling us like they should never be part of any food product, and other people are saying, well, that's overblown and that's not really as big of a deal as we thought. So was there something like maybe a patient case that kind of flipped the switch for you?
I mean, it was really actually my own research into the topic. And, my stance, Joe, is that moderation is key in everything. So like you're talking about, there's two sides. One saying never let a drop of seed oil cross your lips, and the other saying, hey, it's good for you. Neither of them are right, Honestly, what we have to do is we have to look at historically, ancestrally, evolutionarily, what were human beings consuming and how are they consuming food before? And the fact is that seed oils evolutionarily have never been part of our diet. They're because they come from a source that has minuscule amounts of them. So what is a seed oil? A seed oil is essentially oil from a seed that's normally not oily. And some seeds that are oily too, like sunflower seeds. But think of corn, think of soy, think of safflower, if you even know what that is. Think of cottonseed. I mean, the seeds from the cotton plant that we make our clothes with. These are all seeds that have minuscule amounts of oil in the germ, which is essentially the embryo of the seed. And what happens is when we mill these seeds, like say you mill soy or you mill corn to make flour, a little bit of that oil gets dispersed throughout the flour. And if you leave it in there, it goes rancid. The flour goes rancid. So you have to remove it. And so they remove this oil using and we can talk about that later, how they do it, but they remove this oil. Now they got all this oil because we're growing massive amounts of corn through subsidies and soy through subsidies. So even though there's a small amount of oil in these seeds, we're getting a massive amount of it. And what do? Well, they sell it for food. And that never existed in evolutionary history. So what do I say about seed oils? Well, they shouldn't be part of your diet as a mainstay, like they have been for my whole life and your whole life. Grew up with, I can't believe it's not butter in the fridge and a ball of vegetable oil in the pantry, and that's just not something that you should be putting in your body or your children's body. We can talk about metabolically why, but it wasn't meant for us to be eaten as food.
And why has it become so prevalent in like you said, everything from 1980s commercials and every product you see to still to this present day? How did it get there?
Well, I mean, it started in the 1960s. A guy named Ansel Keys, and you may have heard of this guy. He was an epidemiological nutritional researcher, and he had a premise that eating fat. First, his premise was eating fat caused heart disease. And then he evolved and he did this cherry-picked study called the 7-country study, which that's a long description of what that was. But basically, he found 7 countries that fit a hypothesis that said the more saturated fat you eat in your diet, the higher risk of heart attack. Okay. And so he put that out into the world, and the world took it up because at the time, especially in the United States, we were in a heart disease epidemic. I mean, FDR died of cardiovascular disease. Truman had a massive heart attack. No, sorry, not Truman. Eisenhower had a massive heart attack. Men in their 30s and 40s were dropping dead of heart attacks. Women were starting to have heart attacks. It was an epidemic, something that we had never seen in ancestral history, actually. I mean, it was infectious disease and other things were the main causes of disease. And now all of a sudden, everyone's dying of heart attacks. And so, Ansel Keys is coming out saying saturated fat's bad for you. And we're having tons of heart attacks in the country. And at the time, up to this point, we're using butter, tallow, saturated fats, animal fats, lard, mainly saturated fats from animals. And World War II happens. We get this huge industrial boom from the development of fertilizers and the ability to grow massive amounts of foods that enabled us to mobilize for war. And so now we've got all this corn, we've got all this soy, and we're being told that saturated fat's bad for you. So here we've got this source of polyunsaturated fats that's coming out of seeds that's never been in our bodies really before. And we're being told that if you eat saturated fat, it's bad for you. Seed oils are highly polyunsaturated. That means they have, so let's give a definition here. Polyunsaturated means multiple double bonds within the fat chain. Fat is like a string of carbons that are connected together. And then in between them, there's usually single bonds. And a saturated fat is all single bonds. A polyunsaturated fat has multiple double bonds, which are very susceptible to oxidation. And so those are the two differences between the two fats. Now, vegetable oils are highly polyunsaturated, and we were being told that saturated fats are bad for you. So we moved as a society to eating polyunsaturated fats from seed oils. So that was a industrial move because it made money for commercial farming and industry. It was a ideological move because there was an ideological movement that saturated fat was bad for you. And it became I mean, I grew up thinking fat was bad for you. I mean, and most of us did, And so it ingrained itself into the mentality of the US. And all of a sudden, we're subsisting on seed oils. And all the while, cardiovascular disease, metabolic disease, neurodegenerative disease is skyrocketing. And we're thinking, well, at least we're not eating saturated fat.
So these public figures, obviously governmental figures, were starting to get, as you mentioned, drop dead and or massive heart attacks. What do you think, or was there a time earlier on, 30, 40 years ago, that people started to question the seed oils? Because I feel like it's just coming out in the recent years, but why did no one go back to that in 30, 40 years ago?
Yeah, well, this is the thing. Okay, so we did have that data 30 or 40 years ago. There's a few, but it was covered up. It was not covered up like purposefully. It was covered up because the scientific consensus at the time was that seed oils were good for you. Polyunsaturated fat was good for you, which comes from seed oils. So the studies that were contradictory to that were just ignored. Really, a study I really like is from India in the 1960s. A researcher by the name of Malhotra was working for the railway ministry in India. In India, the trains are a big deal. Everyone transports across the country in trains. And they have to maintain a large workforce to maintain the railways, right? And they're paid for by the government, and the government also pays and manages their healthcare. So they had this huge, basically compendium of data on the care and health of their railway workers. Well, this researcher named Dr. Malhotra went and looked at 2 groups of railway workers, one group from North India and one group from South India. And at that time, before all these people got their fat from ghee, which is butter fat, dairy fat, and from animal meat in the north, because in the North India, they ate meat. In South India, they were mostly vegetarian, but they got a lot of fat from ghee. Well, the time the government started subsidizing these people in South India with seed oils. And they're like, hey, here's seed oils. You can't afford much ghee, so here's seed oils. So they start cooking with seed oils. But the people in North India were like, no, I don't want that. It was against their way of cooking and everything. So they stuck with their saturated fat from animals and their in ghee, which is from dairy. And the North Indians were smoking, eating tons of sugar and tons of saturated fat. And heart attacks were a curiosity among the North Indians, whereas the South Indians were dying in droves of cardiovascular disease. So this researcher who's like, wait a second, I've got one group who's eating a ton of saturated fat and one group who's eating a ton of seed oils. And the ones who are eating seed oils, they don't smoke, they don't eat a lot of sugar, but they're dying of heart attacks constantly. Whereas this group who smokes like chimneys and eats a ton of saturated fat, they're totally fine. Can't even record a heart attack in this huge population of people. And so, I mean, it was data like that, he reported it to the world, but it was contrary to scientific consensus at the time. And, another good example here is that, Ansel Keys did the 7-country study, and that is an epidemiological study. So it means you watch people over time and you record what happens. You're not setting up a controlled setting. It shows association, not causation. That's what an epidemiological study does. To show causation, you have to set up a randomized controlled clinical trial where you control factors, you give one group of people one treatment or intervention, and you give the other another intervention. So at the time, they wanted to prove Ansel Keys' hypothesis called the diet heart hypothesis that saturated fat caused heart disease. So they set up 2 clinical trials, one in Sydney and one in Minnesota. They were called the Sydney Diet Heart Study and the Minnesota Coronary Experiment. These studies were done over several years, and then their results, they weren't completely reported. They basically came out and said saturated fat increases cholesterol, which we know it does, and polyunsaturated fat lowers cholesterol, which we know it does. But the question is, does high cholesterol cause death? Does it lead to cardiovascular disease? And does polyunsaturated fat and low cholesterol lead to less cardiovascular death or morbidity? And they didn't report those results. So in the 2000s, a guy named Christopher Ramsden, he's a researcher at the NIH, he went and uncovered the raw data from these 2 studies, and he found that the people who are eating seed oils, which was the control group in the Sydney study, had like a 70% higher rate of heart attacks than the ones who were eating saturated fat. And in the Minnesota coronary experiment, patients older than 65 had a higher rate of death from myocardial infarction if they were in the polyunsaturated fat group. Likely what happened at the time is they saw these results and they're like, oh, crap, we can't report that. It's contrary to the consensus. I'll lose my academic position. I won't get a promotion. I won't get the next grant that I'm going for if I come out and say something that everyone knows is not true. And so the data got buried until 30, 40 years later. So we did know that polyunsaturated fats, one, that saturated fat wasn't bad for us, and that polyunsaturated fats, seed oils, were likely not good for us. We also knew that trans fats were horrible for us. And still, not until like 7 years ago, did they get banned in the US. I mean, that tub of I can't believe it's not butter in your fridge that replaced butter, that led to massive cardiovascular carnage around the world. And we thought it was healthy for us. So, misinformation is very complex. Oftentimes it's not intentionally done. Sometimes it is, but oftentimes it's a conscious or subconscious like movement in human psychology, that propagates. And that's kind of how we ended up in this seed oil debacle.
Yeah, obviously, you're, as a neurosurgeon yourself, brain health is obviously critical. For people listening, what do seed oils do? Like, is this oxidation creating inflammation in the brain and other parts of the body? And that's sort of what is leading to these cardiovascular events and other ailments that they might be deriving from not knowing, like you said, knowing maybe it was on purpose or not, depending on the person in the study. But what are the effects of this years later and or immediately?
Okay, so I think to answer that question, we got to understand what's in a seed oil. I had mentioned that that's majority polyunsaturated fat. Depending on the seed oil, it's different proportions of polyunsaturated fats. The main polyunsaturated fat in most seed oils is something called linoleic acid. And a linoleic acid is an omega-6 fatty acid. You've heard of omega-6 fatty acids, I'm sure, but you've also heard of omega-3 fatty acids. They are these polyunsaturated fats that are considered essential fatty acids because they are. They're essential. We can't make them and we need them in our body. But we need them in small amounts. So linoleic acid is an omega-6 fatty acid. That's essential. And we need about 1 to 2 grams of it. Okay. And what linoleic acid does is it metabolizes into a compound called arachidonic acid and then into these prostaglandins and leukotrienes, which are basically pro-inflammatory compounds in our body. They create inflammation, okay? And they do that for a reason because inflammation is not bad. I mean, nowadays we hear of inflammation in a negative context most of the time, right? I mean, yeah, you want to lower your inflammation, and you do when your inflammation is more than what you should have. But inflammation is how we heal. If you cut your arm, you heal it with inflammation. If you break a bone, you heal it with inflammation. If you have a heart attack, you heal it with inflammation. And if you can't start an inflammatory cascade, you don't heal. Inflammation is very important. And omega-6 fatty acids, linoleic acid, is a crucial mediator of that process. So we know that. And then on the opposite, omega-3 fatty acid churns off the inflammatory cascade because you want to start a cascade, but then you want to wrap it up, right? And finish. So you want to heal, start the cascade of inflammation, heal the wound, heal the injury, then wrap it up and be done with it. And omega-6 and omega-3 are like yin and yang. They balance that process. Now, what happened? So, and I'll also say evolutionarily, we have been about a 1-to-1 ratio or a 2-to-1 ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acids. Okay, so it's very balanced, pro-inflammatory, anti-inflammatory. Now, what happens when you eat some brownies that have a cup of soy oil in it, which is almost all like 60% linoleic acid? Well, you're all of a sudden getting 10, 15 grams of linoleic acid when you need 1 gram. And throughout that day, you likely had very little omega-3 fatty acids because most people don't eat much marine food or they don't take a supplement. And so you end up in this heavily weighted pro-inflammatory cascade. Okay, because you've got too much omega-6 promoting inflammation and you've got too little omega-3 churning it down. And so what happens now you're have systemic inflammation that's inappropriate, it's over the top. What does that do? Well, it breaks everything down, including your brain, which is what you originally asked about. It causes neurodegenerative disease is an inflammatory disease. Metabolic syndrome is an inflammatory disease. Cardiovascular disease, atherosclerosis of our arteries and our brain and our heart, that is an inflammatory disease. All these diseases take their origins in too much inflammation. And omega-6 plays a key role in that because when you have too much of it, you're in hyperinflammation. You're like, you got your foot on the gas and no way of braking.
That makes total sense. Okay, that's a great analogy for people listening. How about when it comes to your community, right? Are there more people? Because I know, doctors and practitioners I talk to, it's always statins, like let's get rid of LDL, whatever it might be is too high. Do you consider your beliefs on seed oils to be more outside the norm that's currently in the industry?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you look at social media, you'll just see you think everyone thinks seed oil is the devil, and I don't think that. I think that when you eat too much of it and it's bad for you. But I think, there's a lot of things you can take too much of and it's bad for you. Seed oil is something I'm very careful about in my life. And when I talk about it in front of my physician colleagues, they have no idea, honestly. They're like, okay. Yeah, I mean, because we don't learn about this in medical school.
Right.
I mean,
Nutrition,
we don't get a single, I don't think, we learned about omega-6 fatty acids and pro-inflammatory molecules and omega-3, but we didn't learn anything about nutrition. So when I talk to my colleagues about this, they listen to my podcast and they'll be like, wow, that was interesting. I never heard of that. And I'm like, yeah, we don't get taught that. You have to self-teach yourself. And I take a very scientific approach. I go through literature and pull this stuff out. But So yeah, I mean, none of them, I don't get any shade from my colleagues about, cholesterol because they're all like, "Oh, I didn't know that." Yeah.
So what would it be for someone who's trying to process, all right, moderation, is it different depending on the person and their biochemistry, whatever's going on in their body, as to what's considered a reasonable amount of these seed oils?
Yeah, so okay, so evolutionarily, which I think is very important, you know, we need about 1 to 2 grams of omega-6 fatty acids per day. But you can, and that's the main oil in most seed oils, main fat in most seed oils. You can get that from whole foods, no problem. If you're eating whole foods, you're eating animal foods, you're eating oily fruits, you'll like avocado or nuts, you'll get omega-6 fatty acid and meet your daily requirement. That's moderation. That is, in my mind, is moderation. As soon as you put a bottle of soy oil or corn oil in your pantry, you're out of the realm of moderation. And, this is a problem we see all over the place with finding moderation is we say, okay, so this is way over here. And normally midline would be here, but we got to find the middle ground between super extreme and normal. And all of a sudden we're out of the way out of the range of normal. So no, moderate is getting 1 to 2 grams of linoleic acid per day. Now, if you ask me, is that, and that for everybody, okay, it's not different among different people. But if you ask me, hey, should I only do that and never eat anything out, never eat any packaged food, never eat any restaurant food? I mean, because all those foods are loaded with seed oils. I mean, every processed food is, every restaurant meal is, every, bucket of fries or chicken wings or whatever you want, when you're going out with your friends, a steak, you order a steak, they cook it in seed oil at a restaurant. If you ask me, should I just completely avoid it because then I'm going to be beyond my 1 to 2 grams per day? I wouldn't say you should avoid it. I would say in that case, use moderation. If weigh the risks and the benefits. So I would say you're out with your friends, you're having a good time, you're making social connections, which are super valuable to our health, our mental health. Then yeah, be okay with sharing a bowl of fries with your friends or eating a steak or having a little salad dressing that's probably got some oil in it. That's okay. But when you're home, there shouldn't be a bottle of vegetable oil in your pantry. And I think that's probably the main improvement people can make because a lot of people have vegetable oils at their home and they cook with them and they bake with them. Get that out of there. You don't have to use that. You can use coconut oil, you can use tallow, you can use butter, you can use avocado oil, you can use olive oil. Use something else. When you're out, don't glorify gluttony, but don't be a monk either. Enjoy your life. And so that's what I say moderate. That's what moderation looks like to me.
Yeah, it's just not completely cutting it off and enjoying life, but being cognizant in your own home and when you cook your own food.
Exactly.
Well, how about someone who's, biohackers deep into labs and checking? Are there markers you could go to check this and make improvements in inflammation that people may be unaware of at their average CBC?
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay, there you can check red blood cell omega-6 fatty acid levels and omega-3 fatty acid levels. I don't recommend it. It's an expensive test and it's obscure and the data is difficult to interpret. I say don't worry about that. What you should do is look at your metabolic health on your labs. So that is one is your HDL to triglyceride ratio, triglyceride to HDL ratio. For a man, that should be below 2. For a woman, that should be below 1.7. And what that tells is your state of metabolic health. Okay? And your state of metabolic health will determine your inflammatory levels. If you're eating a bunch of seed oils and you're just pushing the pro-inflammatory pedal with, omega-6 fatty acid pro-inflammatory mediators that are created throughout your body, your your metabolic health will suffer. Triglyceride to HDL ratio will go up. And so I'm a big believer that is probably one of the most important things that you can look in your labs. You can look at liver enzymes and some high sensitivity CRP and all this stuff, but that triglyceride to HDL ratio is a fantastic marker of metabolic health and cardiovascular risk.
Yeah, and that's something they could get at their typical, it
on a
wellness check.
standard lipid panel. Yeah.
Perfect. So is it fair to say saturated fats outperform seed oils in reducing oxidative stress?
Yeah. Okay. So here's the thing, Joe. Saturated fats are almost impervious to oxidation. They don't have any double bonds. And that single bond of a saturated fat is very strong and very resistant to oxidation. So when you eat fat, it gets packaged into triglycerides, chylomicrons, then into triglycerides, then into LDL molecules. And those go along with an LDL to your body throughout your body to repair little injuries throughout your body. LDL is a repair molecule. It is not a villain. It is a fantastic molecule that carries healing fats and lipids to your cell membranes for repair. When you eat fat, your LDLs eventually get packed with these fats that you've eaten in your diet. So imagine you've eaten a cup of canola oil and a pan of brownies, Well, now your LDL molecules are going to be full of omega 6 fatty acids, linoleic acid, and they are going to be highly oxidizable. And oxidized LDL is one of the biggest initiating factors for cardiovascular disease. Now, let's say you made your brownies with a bunch of butter, a cup of butter. Well, let's actually say coconut oil, because coconut oil is almost all saturated fat. Well, your LDL molecules are full of saturated fat now. And saturated fat doesn't oxidize. And so when your LDL goes out to your endothelium somewhere, maybe say in your heart, one of your coronary arteries, you had a little high blood pressure, or you got a little stress during a workout or something, the endothelium's nicked by some hemodynamic stress. The LDL shows up to heal that endothelial injury, and it's full of saturated fats. That LDL will just donate the cholesterol, donate the fat and the triglycerides to repair the molecule, the endothelium, and it'll move on. Okay. Now, if it's full of linoleic acid, which is highly oxidizable, it'll get stuck in that endothelium. The LDL will oxidize because of its contents, and then it will initiate atherosclerosis. So that's why saturated fat is like fairly inert and super safe and clean for our bodies. And I would also say that there's not been any definitive studies that showed saturated fat causes heart disease.
That's what I was going to ask.
I mean, you can make a few connections, here and there, people with high saturated fat that had heart disease, but then you can't consistently observe it over studies or over ancestral history. When you look at these huge epidemiological studies like the PURE study, people who ate saturated fat actually had lower all-cause and cardiovascular mortality. So it is a piece of information that we have had ingrained into us that is just flat out not true. One really cool study I like is about the Tokelauans in the South Pacific. So this is a South Pacific island that eats 70% of their calories from coconut. And coconut is like 80 to 90% saturated fat. So around 60% of their calories in their diet, 60%, 60, is saturated fat. And these guys smoke like chimneys. Okay, now I'm not joking. They grow coconut, they eat it, but they also trade it. And what do they trade it? They don't trade it for money. They trade it for cigarettes. So these boats show up to this island and they trade dried coconuts called copra for cigarettes. And these Tokelauans love the smoke. And they eat fish and they eat coconut and they eat taro roots, and then they smoke their cigarettes, and they're super happy, and they have zero cardiovascular disease. Zero.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
That's incredible.
I know.
So, would it be fair to say, or actually, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Another thing we've been told growing up is everything, or a lot of it, is genetics, right? Genetics. If your grandfather had this, you're going to have that. How much do you put into that belief system?
Yeah. So I think genetics is important. Okay. It doesn't define you or condemn you to cardiovascular disease, but it shows your susceptibility to the things that we do wrong that lead to cardiovascular disease, like metabolic syndrome, high blood pressure, smoking. I mean, these are the three big ones, okay? And so if you have a history of cardiovascular disease in your family, okay, then you should be hyper aware. You should not be smoking. You should be maintaining optimal metabolic health. You should be maintaining optimal blood pressure. because that shows you that when you injure vessels, you are more likely to develop cardiovascular disease than someone else. So if you took these families with high rates of heart disease who don't have these certain genetic mutations, and you took them and you put them out in the world living, eating non-processed food, getting exercise, sunshine, living a life the way human beings are evolved to live life, they would stop having heart attacks. But as soon as you put them in this situation where they're loading their LDL molecules with oxidizable fats, they're loading their bodies with oxidative stress from smoke or whatever they're doing, they're getting poor sleep, they're, metabolically unhealthy with high glucose levels and, tons of glycation of their proteins. All of a sudden, they're setting up this scenario for having a heart attack.
So would it be safe to, because I've read some people will say, okay, well, these seed oils aren't terrible because they provide these essential polyunsaturated fats. What do you say to that? Is that a thing, essential polyunsaturated fats?
Yeah, omega-6, it's omega-6 fatty acid. It's an essential fatty acid. But again, you only need 1 to 2 grams of it per day. Okay? In a cup of whatever, soy oil, in a cup of soy oil, you get about, actually I don't know. It's a lot though. You can get, multiple grams of omega-6 fatty acids in this bolus of soy oil or corn oil. Whereas if you eat just a whole food diet, you get food and fats from natural products like animal foods, seeds, things like that. It's very hard to exceed the normal level of essential fatty acid. So yes, omega-6 fatty acids in seed oils are essential, but you only need a tiny amount of them.
Why do you think now is the moment that the United States is sort of rethinking seed oils? Do you think this has the legs to kind of catch on? Or do you think that this country is so ingrained in relying on the ultra processed foods and snacks and, like you said, fries with your friends and whatever it might be, that lifestyle? Do you think there's hope for that kind of a change to happen?
Joe, honestly, I like to be optimistic all the time, but I don't think so. I think there's too much money and too much infrastructure and too much agribusiness behind seed oils. I mean, they have a huge surplus of oil from the extraction from these seeds that they mill for, animal feeds and corn meal for art and wheat and all that stuff. I mean, all this oil that comes out of these seeds needs to be used, and the economic machinery is churning, and it's pumping it out there, and people are willing to buy it. That's the other thing. So, is there more awareness now? Yeah, absolutely. There's more awareness now, and that means there's going to be less demand. But we're not a society that loves to take the higher road on things. We like easier, convenient, delicious, and that I don't know that will change anytime soon. So this is my motto on this. Listen, just get the information out to people. Let people understand why seed oils at the levels that we take them in is not good for you, and then let them make their own decisions. And it's a free country, and hopefully someday a free world. I think that's reasonable. If you want to eat a bucket of seed oil every day, do it, but just as long as you know the consequences. And for all those who, this was the real tragedy, is that we thought that polyunsaturated fat was the healthiest thing for us. We thought that I can't believe it's not butter, which was all trans fats, was good for us. That was the real tragedy. That was the real criminality in what happened, was that we were misinformed. So now that we can get information out better through social media, podcasts, and better communication lines, we can let the world know that, hey, eating this much seed oils is not good for you. This is what would happen. Here's the consequence. Make your decisions. And I think we're in a good place from that aspect.
How about when it comes to kids too? Because I don't know if you've seen on social media, you see those videos of, I don't know if it's like 1965 and like PE class and all the men and women, they're all fit and they're doing pull-ups and right. And then you see the average United States child now, and between diabetes and all these sort of metabolic issues that you were describing earlier that are so prevalent in these children, the wake up call there. How much of the medical community do you think needs to step in? And again, there are compromised politicians and I'm sure physicians and what have you. But for the sake of kids, I mean, is that not enough to paint a vivid picture enough for people to just to compare that?
All we can do is give the gift of information and knowledge to people. They're kids, it's different, right? Because their parents are making their decisions for them. So if
Right.
their parents, so in medicine, we have something called informed consent. I'm a neurosurgeon, I do surgery, but I also give medical treatments. Every patient I do surgery on or I give a medical treatment has to give me informed consent. They have to say, I understand what you're going to do and I want you to do it. And that is for anything, for medications, foods, all that. We can, as physicians, we can tell doctors, hey, listen, or we can tell patients, hey, listen, this is bad for you. This is bad for your child. And they get to decide whether they want to act on that or not. I mean, it's the same thing, Joe, with all vaccines, with surgeries, with medical treatments. Every person has the autonomy over their own body, what they put in it. So, I mean, we can talk about seed oils, but I mean, what about alcohol? Alcohol is one of the worst things you can do for your body. And so, in moderation, maybe not as bad as we would imagine, but in the amount that we consume it in the US, it's horrible. Sugar, same thing. The amount of sugar that we eat, the amount of refined carbohydrates we consume is just not good for you. So we got to just get information out there. Give people the gift of knowledge, of unbiased, clear, actionable information, and then let them decide what they want to do with it.
And like you said, with the parental consent, and what's
Mm-hmm.
what's an 8-year-old to do?
Yeah, yeah.
So if you had to sort of tattoo maybe like one health mantra to everyone listening right now, what would that be? There's so much out there and there's so much, but if you had to streamline it into like a cheat code for the navigating
Yeah.
this seed oil debate.
Yeah. So I would say this. Listen, if your ancestors didn't see it as food, then you probably shouldn't either. And that the reason I say that is because, history and historical traditions can teach us a lot. Our ancestors weren't gulping down the seed oil. They didn't even have access to it because we didn't have the industrial processes to extract it yet. They were eating tallow, they were eating butter, they were eating, coconut oil if your ancestors are from the tropical part of the world. And they were eating these in large amounts. And so, when you're trying to decide what to do, I mean, the world of nutrition and health optimization is very complex, as you know. You deal with this all day on your podcast, and it's really hard to interpret often. And especially, you can even I go through the literature and I go deep and I read thousands of studies, and oftentimes I'll come away with I'm not 100% sure on this one, but we do have the study, the greatest human trial in human history, and that is the study of ancestral survivability. So if societies survived and thrived on a certain diet, eating certain foods, then that likely has some compatibility with our biology. So that's what I say. If you're trying to figure out what to do, think about what your ancestors did. Were they eating a cup of canola oil a day? Probably not. So,
And like you mentioned, the sunshine, getting
yeah,
outside, and all the elements, proper sleep, things that again, circadian rhythm. I'm sure it all plays
yeah,
into the
all of
same.
that does. It's our biology is so complex, and we relies on so many factors, and all that is so important. And if you look back at ancestral traditions, you'll see all that was in place for optimal thriving communities and people.
And so, for people who are like, because I'm learning a ton from you, what's the best place for people to connect with you? I know you have your podcast. Can you talk about that and what you do on it? I briefly
Yeah,
touched on it earlier.
yeah. So I have a podcast called the Dr. Kumar Discovery. You can search it on any major podcast player. And I do I do a couple things. I do these deep dives into medical topics where I try to take complex stuff, look at the literature, break down, try to remove the bias and the intent that might, not might not be guiding us in the right direction, and present it in a clear way so people can understand, hey, this is what the data actually says, and here's what I might do with it. Because I give actionable tips as well. I don't give medical advice, but I lay it out so people can like make actionable and wise decisions based on clear information. And so I did that. I was doing that for myself. I was doing deep dives myself, looking into the literature, looking at ancestral traditions, looking at common sense, which we ignore common sense in the world now, and in medicine. But common sense is like super important. So I look at those three factors, and I would make decisions for myself. And I was like, hey, why don't I do this for everyone else too? I mean, because it's really difficult to get straightforward, understandable information out there on complex health topics. You go to your doctor and they say, take the statin. And you're like, why? And he says, because your cholesterol's high. And well, should I be on a statin? I mean, those are big questions I had to answer for myself, And so I did this podcast so that I could give the world my process, what I do for me, and understand and how to understand how to optimize our health. You can search it on any major podcast player. I'm found on all the social medias. Just search the Dr. Kumar Discovery. And you can also go to my website. It's drkumardiscovery.com. So it's DRKUMAR discovery.com. Or you can email me. I love emails from people. So it's DRKUMAR, so Dr. Kumar at drkumardiscovery.com. DRKUMAR discovery.com. So any of those is good. Yeah, I don't have anything to sell. Putting information out there, and I really want to reach people. I want people to hear and see these things and find out what I'm finding out, what I'm discovering. It's a journey that I take, a journey of discovery, both intellectually and physically and actionably in my life, and I try to share that with everybody else.
That's awesome. That's a great approach, because a lot of people are just disseminating, okay, I read this study, here's what it means, I'm breaking it down for you. But this is like a glimpse into your personal life, but taking these actionable steps, like you said, and that they can apply to themselves and or take the knowledge and apply it to a relative or a loved one.
Exactly.
Right. So I love that approach. So I'll make sure that's on to the show notes. But again, thank you for your time today. I definitely learned a ton from you, and I'll be subscribing to your podcast, and I will have all the links in the notes.
Yeah. Thanks, Joe. It's been great.